The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Buckingham Palace as King Charles sat in his private study, reading through the daily reports. His reading glasses perched on his nose, he scanned each document with the careful attention that had become second nature after decades of royal duty. But today something felt different. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Sarah, his private secretary, entered with a concerned expression. "Your Majesty, the palace has received several requests for interviews about the Princess of Wales. The media seems particularly interested in her recent public appearances." Charles set down his papers and removed his glasses, rubbing his tired eyes. For months he had watched Catherine navigate her royal duties with a grace that reminded him of someone very dear to his heart. The way she connected with people, her genuine warmth, and her unwavering dedication to her causes had not gone unnoticed. "What kind of requests?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "They want to know about her increased visibility, sir. There are questions about whether she's taking on more responsibilities, and some are speculating about changes within the royal family structure." The king stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the gardens where tourists gathered beyond the gates. In the distance, he could see the preparations for Catherine's upcoming engagement at a children's hospital. The event had been planned for weeks, and Charles knew it would be another example of her natural ability to bring comfort and joy to those who needed it most. "And what of the Queen Consort's schedule?" he inquired quietly. Sarah hesitated for a moment before responding. "Her Majesty has reduced her public appearances recently, sir. She mentioned feeling the need for more rest and has expressed interest in focusing on her literary charities from a more private capacity." Charles nodded slowly. Camilla had been by his side through the most challenging transition of his life, from heir to monarch. She had faced criticism with dignity and had slowly won over a public that had once been skeptical of her role, but lately he had noticed a change in her demeanor. She seemed less energetic during public events, more content to step back and let others take the spotlight. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It began subtly, with small changes in scheduling and a gradual shift in the types of events each royal family member attended. Catherine had naturally filled many of the gaps, her popularity with the public making her an obvious choice for high-profile engagements. As Charles reflected on recent weeks, he remembered the moment at the Commonwealth Day service when Catherine had handled an unexpected situation with such poise that it made headlines around the world. A young child in the crowd had become overwhelmed by the ceremony, and Catherine had immediately left her designated position to comfort the family. The images of her kneeling beside the crying child, speaking softly and making the little one smile, had been shared millions of times across social media. That evening, Camilla had made a comment that stayed with Charles. "She has Diana's touch," she had said simply, without any trace of jealousy or competition. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the kind of honesty that had always characterized their relationship. The king's thoughts were interrupted by another knock. This time it was his son William, looking somewhat troubled as he entered the study. "Father, we need to discuss something," William said, closing the door behind him. His usually composed demeanor showed signs of strain, and Charles immediately gave him his full attention. "What's on your mind, William?" "It's about Catherine," William began, then paused as if choosing his words carefully. "She's been receiving an unprecedented amount of attention lately, and while she handles it beautifully, I'm concerned about the pressure it's putting on our family dynamic." Charles gestured for his son to sit down. This conversation had been inevitable, and he had been preparing for it in his own mind for weeks. "The public response to her has been remarkable," William continued. "But I've noticed that some media outlets are creating narratives about power shifts within the family. They're suggesting that Catherine is somehow being positioned as more important than other members. And I worry about how this affects everyone, especially Camilla." The king considered his son's words carefully. William's protective nature toward his wife was admirable, but Charles could see that there was more to his concern than just media speculation. The younger man was grappling with the same observations that Charles had been making privately. "Tell me what you've noticed," Charles said gently. William ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that reminded Charles of his own nervous habits. Last week's charity gala was a perfect example. Catherine gave a speech that was absolutely brilliant, but the coverage completely overshadowed the event's original purpose. The headlines were all about her, and while that's not her fault, it creates an imbalance that we need to address. The king stood and returned to his position by the window. Outside, a group of schoolchildren was being led through the palace gardens on an educational tour. Their excited voices carried on the breeze, a reminder of the joy that royal visits could bring to ordinary people's lives. "Your wife has a gift," Charles said finally. "It's something that can't be taught or manufactured. The question isn't whether we should recognize it, but how we can use it most effectively for the good of the monarchy and the people we serve." William looked up, surprised by his father's directness. "Are you saying you want to increase her role?" "I'm saying that sometimes the institution must evolve to reflect the strengths of its members," Charles replied. "Catherine has proven herself capable of connecting with people in a way that strengthens the royal family's reputation and relevance. If we ignore that capability, we do a disservice to everyone." The conversation that followed would mark the beginning of a significant shift in royal protocol, though neither man fully realized it at the time. As they discussed schedules, responsibilities, and the delicate balance of royal hierarchy, the foundations were being laid for changes that would reshape the public face of the monarchy. Meanwhile, in another wing of the palace, Camilla was having tea with her close friend and confidant, Lady Sarah McCorquodale. The conversation between the two women was quieter, but no less significant than the one taking place in the king's study. The queen consort's private sitting room was filled with the soft afternoon light that filtered through cream-colored curtains. Camilla sat in her favorite armchair, a delicate china teacup balanced in her hands, while Lady Sarah McCorquodale settled into the chair across from her. The room reflected Camilla's personal taste, with books scattered on side tables and fresh flowers from the palace gardens arranged in simple vases. "You seem quieter than usual," Lady Sarah observed, stirring honey into her tea. She had known Camilla for decades and could read her friend's moods with the precision that only comes from long friendship. Camilla smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, Sarah. About my role, about what the future holds, about what's best for the family." Lady Sarah set down her teaspoon and leaned forward slightly. "This is about Catherine, isn't it?" The directness of the question didn't surprise Camilla. Sarah had always been refreshingly honest, a quality that had made their friendship so valuable over the years. "Partly," Camilla admitted, "but it's more complicated than that. I've been watching how she interacts with people, how naturally she fits into situations that would challenge even experienced royals. There's something almost magical about the way she can put people at ease." "You sound admiring rather than concerned," Sarah noted. "I am admiring," Camilla said with genuine warmth. "That's what makes this situation so interesting. 5 years ago, if someone had told me I would be actively encouraging my stepson's wife to take on more prominent roles, I would have thought they were mad." The two women sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both understanding the complexity of the situation. Camilla's journey to acceptance within the royal family had been long and sometimes painful. She had faced criticism, skepticism, and outright hostility from portions of the public who had never forgotten her role in the breakdown of Charles and Diana's marriage. "I remember the early days," Sarah said softly. "You were so determined to prove yourself worthy of Charles's love and the family's acceptance. You worked twice as hard as anyone else just to earn basic respect." Camilla nodded, memories flooding back. "I knew I could never replace Diana in the public's heart, nor did I want to. But I thought I could carve out my own space, create my own legacy, and in many ways I have. My literacy programs have helped thousands of children, and I've built genuine relationships with charities across the Commonwealth." "But," Sarah prompted, sensing there was more. "But lately I find myself wondering if my time in the spotlight should make room for someone who can do even more good," Camilla said, her voice growing stronger. "Catherine has something I've always had to work for. She has natural charisma, an instinctive understanding of what people need from their royal family." Lady Sarah studied her friend's face carefully. "Are you saying you want to step back?" "I'm saying I want to be strategic about when and how I use my influence," Camilla replied. "Last month's hospital visit was a perfect example. Catherine was visiting the children's ward, and I was scheduled for the administrative offices. When we arrived, there was confusion about the timing, and we ended up touring together." Camilla paused to sip her tea, remembering the day clearly. I watched her with those sick children, Sarah. She didn't just visit them. She connected with them. One little boy was too shy to speak, and within minutes she had him laughing and showing her his toy cars. Meanwhile, I felt like I was in the way. That's not true, and you know it, Sarah protested. You've always been wonderful with people. I've learned to be effective with people, Camilla corrected gently. There's a difference between learned skill and natural gift. Catherine has the gift. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Camilla's private secretary entered with a slight bow. Your Majesty, the king would like to speak with you when convenient. He's in the blue drawing room. Camilla exchanged a meaningful glance with Lady Sarah. They both understood that this summons was likely connected to the very topics they had been discussing. Tell His Majesty. I'll join him in 10 minutes, Camilla replied. As the secretary departed, Lady Sarah reached across and squeezed her friend's hand. Whatever Charles wants to discuss, remember that your value to this family isn't measured by public appearances or media coverage. You've been his anchor through the most difficult period of his life. I know, Camilla said, and she meant it. But being an anchor doesn't mean being the public face of the ship. Sometimes the most important support happens behind the scenes. The two friends finished their tea in contemplative silence. When Lady Sarah finally left, Camilla spent a few moments alone, gathering her thoughts before what she suspected would be a pivotal conversation with her husband. As she walked through the palace corridors toward the blue drawing room, Camilla passed several portraits of previous queen consorts. Each woman had faced her own challenges, navigated her own path through the complexities of royal life. Some had been beloved by the public, others respected, but distant. All had found ways to contribute to the institution while staying true to themselves. The blue drawing room was one of Charles's favorite spaces for private conversations. Its intimate scale and comfortable furniture created an atmosphere more conducive to personal discussion than the grander staterooms. When Camilla entered, she found Charles standing by the fireplace, lost in thought. You wanted to see me, she said, settling into a chair near the window. Charles turned to face her, his expression serious but kind. We need to talk about the future direction of our public roles. I've been expecting this conversation, Camilla replied calmly. Her response surprised him. Have you? Charles, I'm not blind. I've watched the public response to Catherine's recent appearances. I've seen the media coverage, the social media engagement, the way crowds react when she arrives somewhere. More importantly, I've seen how you look at her during these events. The king moved to sit across from his wife, leaning forward slightly. How do I look at her? Like a father who's proud of his daughter's accomplishments, Camilla said with a slight smile. Like a king who recognizes a valuable asset to the crown. Like someone who sees potential that should be nurtured rather than limited. Charles was quiet for a long moment, processing the insight in his wife's words. And how do you feel about that? I feel like we're on the verge of something important, Camilla replied. Something that could strengthen the monarchy for generations to come. But only if we handle it correctly. The conversation that followed would reshape not only their marriage but the entire structure of royal responsibilities. As husband and wife, they began to plan a transition that would honor the past while embracing the future. The following Tuesday brought an unexpected test of the new dynamics developing within the royal family. A major charity event at the Royal Albert Hall had been planned for months, with both Camilla and Catherine scheduled to attend separate functions on the same evening. However, a last-minute crisis at Catherine's event meant that the two women would need to coordinate in a way that had never been required before. Catherine stood in her dressing room at Kensington Palace, her lady-in-waiting holding up 2 different evening gowns while she spoke rapidly into her phone. Yes, I understand the Children's Foundation needs our support tonight, but we can't abandon the Veterans Charity either. There has to be a solution. The problem was complex and politically sensitive. The Children's Foundation event had been Catherine's primary commitment, but a security threat at the venue meant it needed to be relocated at the last minute. The only suitable alternative was the Royal Albert Hall, where Camilla was already committed to hosting a reception for military veterans and their families. William entered the room just as Catherine ended her call, his face showing the strain of trying to manage multiple royal schedules simultaneously. The palace is in chaos, he announced. Protocol suggests we should cancel one of the events, but both causes are too important. What does your father suggest? Catherine asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. He wants both events to proceed, William replied, which means you and Camilla will need to work together in the same venue, with overlapping guest lists and media coverage. Catherine sat down heavily in her chair, running her hands through her perfectly styled hair. This could either be a wonderful opportunity or a complete disaster. It depends entirely on how you and Camilla handle it, William said gently. And frankly, I think this might be exactly what the family needs. Meanwhile, at Clarence's house, Camilla was having a similar conversation with her own team. Her private secretary had just finished explaining the situation when Charles arrived, looking both concerned and oddly optimistic. "This isn't the gradual transition we discussed," Camilla said as her husband settled into a chair beside her desk. "No, it's not," Charles agreed. "But perhaps fate is pushing us toward something we were moving toward anyway." Camilla studied her husband's face. "You think this is an opportunity?" "I think this is a chance for the public to see what I've been seeing for months," Charles replied. "Catherine and you working together, supporting each other, showing that the royal family is unified and stronger because of our different strengths." The phone rang, and Camilla's secretary answered with the efficient professionalism that royal staff perfected over years of service. After a brief conversation, she turned to the royal couple. "Your Majesty, the Princess of Wales would like to speak with you directly about tonight's arrangements." Camilla glanced at Charles, who nodded encouragingly. "Put her through." The conversation that followed would later be remembered as a turning point, though it began with typical royal formality. "Catherine, my dear, what a situation we find ourselves in," Camilla said warmly. "I know this complicates your evening terribly," Catherine replied, her voice carrying genuine concern. "If there's any way to minimize the disruption to your event, please tell me what you need." "Actually, I was thinking we might turn this challenge into something special," Camilla suggested. "What if we combined elements of both events? The veterans and the children's charity have more in common than we might initially think." Catherine paused, considering the suggestion. "You mean create one larger event that serves both causes?" "Exactly. Many of our veterans have children, and many of the families served by your charity have military connections. We could highlight those connections while giving both organizations the attention they deserve." The idea was bold and unprecedented. Royal events were typically planned months in advance, with every detail scrutinized and approved by multiple committees. To create a new format with only hours of preparation would require flexibility and trust between the two women that had never been tested before. "It could work," Catherine said slowly, "but it would mean stepping outside traditional protocol. Sometimes the most meaningful moments happen when we step outside our comfort zones," Camilla replied. Charles, listening to his wife's side of the conversation, felt a surge of pride and admiration. This was the woman he had fallen in love with decades ago, the one who could find creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. "What would you need from me?" Catherine asked. "Partnership," Camilla answered simply. "We'll need to coordinate our speeches, our interactions with guests, even our entrances and exits. The media will be watching every gesture, looking for signs of competition or tension, and they won't find any," Catherine said with growing confidence, "because there isn't any." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity as staff from both households worked together to merge two separate events into one cohesive evening. Florists rearranged centerpieces to incorporate symbols representing both veterans and children's charities. Caterers adjusted menus to accommodate the different dietary requirements of a mixed guest list. Most importantly, Camilla and Catherine spent time on the phone together, planning their joint appearance with the careful coordination of experienced performers. As evening approached, both women prepared for what they knew would be one of the most closely watched royal events of the year. The media had caught wind of the unusual circumstances, and speculation was running wild about what the combined appearance might reveal about the future direction of the monarchy. Catherine arrived at the Royal Albert Hall first. Stepping out of her car to the familiar flashes of photographers' cameras, she wore a deep navy gown that struck the perfect balance between elegance and accessibility, her jewelry chosen to reflect both sophistication and restraint. As she walked up the red carpet, her smile was genuine and relaxed, giving no hint of the behind-the-scenes coordination that had made the evening possible. 20 minutes later, Camilla's car pulled up to the same entrance. Her arrival created an interesting moment of anticipation, as everyone wondered how the two women would interact when they came face to face in such a public setting. The answer came within minutes, as Camilla entered the reception area where Catherine was already speaking with guests. Instead of maintaining separate spaces or keeping to different sides of the room, Camilla walked directly to Catherine and embraced her warmly, a gesture that was captured by dozens of cameras and would be replayed countless times in the days that followed. "Shall we show them how it's done?" Camilla whispered to Catherine as they prepared to address the combined gathering. "Together," Catherine replied, and they walked to the podium side by side, ready to demonstrate a new model of royal cooperation that would surprise everyone, including themselves. The joint appearance at the Royal Albert Hall exceeded everyone's expectations, but it also created new questions that couldn't be ignored. The following morning, Charles sat in his private study, reading newspaper headlines that ranged from glowing praise to pointed speculation about shifting power dynamics within the royal family. Dynamic duo dazzles at Albert Hall, read one headline. Another proclaimed, a new royal partnership. But it was the more analytical pieces that concerned him most, particularly an editorial questioning whether the evening represented a permanent change in royal hierarchy. His contemplation was interrupted by a call from his private secretary. "Sir, you have several requests for interviews and statements about last night's event. The BBC, ITV, and several international outlets are asking for clarification about future joint appearances." Charles removed his reading glasses and rubbed his temples. The success of the evening had been undeniable, but it had also accelerated conversations that he had hoped to manage more gradually. "Schedule a meeting with William and Catherine for this afternoon," he said, "and ask the Queen Consort to join us when her schedule permits." That afternoon, the family gathered in the same blue drawing room where Charles and Camilla had discussed the initial changes weeks earlier. This time, however, the atmosphere was charged with a different kind of energy. The success of the previous evening had proven that their instincts were correct, but it had also made their private decisions very public. Catherine entered the room looking poised but thoughtful. She had spent the morning reading the same coverage that had occupied Charles, and she understood the implications as clearly as anyone. "Last night was wonderful," she began, "but I'm concerned about the message we might be sending without meaning to." William, who had arrived with her, nodded in agreement. "The coverage is overwhelmingly positive, but there are undertones suggesting that this represents some kind of power shift or competition between family members." Charles appreciated his son's directness. "What undertones specifically?" "Several articles are questioning whether Camilla is being sidelined in favor of Catherine," William explained. "Others are suggesting that this is part of a deliberate strategy to modernize the monarchy by putting younger, more popular royals in prominent positions. And both interpretations miss the point entirely," Camilla said as she entered the room, having caught the end of William's comments. "This isn't about anyone being sidelined or anyone taking over. It's about finding the best way to serve the causes we all care about." She took her usual seat near the window, and Charles noticed that she looked more energized than she had in weeks. The previous evening had clearly been as invigorating for her as it had been successful. "The problem," Catherine said carefully, "is that the media and the public need narratives they can understand. The idea of family members simply working together for the common good is apparently too simple for some commentators." "Then perhaps we need to give them a narrative that makes sense," Camilla suggested. "One that explains what we're actually doing instead of letting them create their own theories." Charles leaned forward, interested in his wife's thinking. "What kind of narrative?" "Honest," Camilla replied. "We acknowledge that the monarchy is evolving, that we're finding new ways to maximize our effectiveness. We explain that this isn't about any individual gaining or losing power, but about the institution adapting to serve the people better." William looked skeptical. "That's a risky approach. It admits that changes are happening, which could lead to even more speculation about what other changes might be coming. The alternative is to pretend that nothing is different while continuing to make decisions that clearly show something is different," Catherine pointed out. "At some point, the contradiction becomes more damaging than the transparency." The conversation that followed was one of the most frank discussions the family had ever had about their public roles and private relationships. For the first time, they addressed directly the reality that, Catherine's popularity and natural abilities had created opportunities that needed to be acknowledged and managed thoughtfully. "I need to know how everyone really feels about this," Charles said finally. "Not what you think I want to hear or what's diplomatically appropriate, but what you actually think about the direction we're moving." Camilla spoke first. "I think Catherine has gifts that should be used to their fullest extent. I also think I have experience and skills that complement hers, rather than compete with them. If we can find ways to combine our strengths, the monarchy becomes more effective." William looked at his wife before responding. "Catherine loves this work and she's extraordinarily good at it, but we don't want her success to come at anyone else's expense or to create tensions within the family." "And you, Catherine?" Charles asked. Catherine took a deep breath before answering. "I want to do whatever serves the crown and the people best. If that means taking on more visible roles, I'm prepared for that responsibility. If it means finding ways to support others while staying in the background, I'm equally prepared for that. But I don't want to pretend that last night didn't prove something important, which is that when we work together openly and genuinely, we're more effective than when we try to maintain artificial boundaries or compete for attention." Charles stood and walked to his favorite position by the window, looking out at the garden where tourists continued their daily pilgrimage to catch glimpses of royal life. The conversation had clarified something important for him, something he had been sensing but hadn't articulated even to himself. "I think we're approaching this backwards," he said finally. "We're talking about managing change, as if these developments are something happening to us rather than choices we're making." The others waited for him to continue. "What if we stop reacting and start leading?" Charles asked. "What if we announce our intentions rather than letting others speculate about them?" "You mean make this official somehow?" William asked. "I mean acknowledge that the royal family is deliberately evolving our approach to better serve our responsibilities," Charles replied. "We explain that this includes finding new ways for family members to work together, and that last night was an example of that collaboration, not an accident or a response to crisis." Camilla smiled at her husband's words. "You're suggesting we take control of the narrative." "I'm suggesting we tell the truth about what we're doing and why we're doing it," Charles corrected. "The speculation and gossip can only hurt us if we let others define what our actions mean." Catherine looked thoughtful. "It would require a significant level of coordination going forward. If we're going to present ourselves as deliberately collaborative, we need to actually be deliberately collaborative." "Which brings us back to the practical questions," William said. "How do we restructure schedules, responsibilities, and public appearances to reflect this new approach?" "Carefully," Camilla said with a laugh, "and with a lot more communication than we've traditionally required." The meeting continued for another hour, but the fundamental decision had been made. Instead of managing change reactively, they would embrace it proactively. The success of the previous evening had shown them what was possible when they worked together openly. Now they needed to build on that success systematically. As the family members prepared to leave, Charles felt a sense of optimism that had been building for weeks finally crystallize into certainty. The monarchy he would leave to his son would be stronger, more flexible, and more connected to the people it served than the one he had inherited. 3 weeks after their family meeting, the new collaborative approach faced its most significant test yet. A state visit from the President of France required a full program of ceremonial events, diplomatic receptions, and cultural exchanges. Traditionally, such visits followed rigid protocols with clearly defined roles for each royal family member. This time, however, Charles decided to implement their new flexible approach on the international stage. The planning sessions took place in the palace's state dining room, with maps, schedules, and diplomatic briefings spread across the mahogany table. Catherine sat beside Camilla, both women studying the proposed itinerary with the kind of careful attention that had become their trademark. "The cultural exchange at the National Gallery presents an interesting opportunity," Catherine observed, pointing to Thursday's schedule. "If we approach it as a joint presentation rather than separate appearances, we could showcase both British artistic heritage and contemporary cultural diplomacy." Camilla nodded thoughtfully. "The French president's wife has a particular interest in literacy programs. That creates a natural bridge between your educational initiatives and my library foundation work." Charles watched this exchange with growing satisfaction. The easy collaboration between the two women had developed naturally over the past month, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to excellence rather than any forced attempt at friendship. "The challenge," said Sir Clive Alderton, the King's private secretary, "is maintaining proper diplomatic protocol while implementing these new collaborative elements. The French delegation has specific expectations about how such visits traditionally unfold. Have we explained our approach to their advance team?" William asked. "We've outlined the general framework," Sir Clive replied carefully. "Their response has been interested but cautious." Catherine smiled at the diplomatic language. "They're not sure whether we're being innovative or just disorganized." "Exactly," Sir Clive admitted with a rare display of humor. "Then we'll need to demonstrate that this approach enhances rather than diminishes the formal elements of the visit," Charles said. "Every collaborative moment must be executed with the same precision as traditional protocol." The conversation turned to specific logistics, and it became clear that implementing their new approach would require unprecedented coordination between different royal households. Camilla's staff would need to work directly with Catherine's team in ways that had never been necessary before. Schedules would need to be synchronized, speeches coordinated, and even wardrobe choices considered jointly to avoid conflicts or unintended messages. Lady Susan Hussey, one of the most experienced members of the royal household staff, raised a concern that had been quietly worrying several advisors. "Your Majesties, while the public response to recent collaborative appearances has been overwhelmingly positive, we should consider how this approach might be perceived by other Commonwealth realms and international partners." "What concerns specifically?" Charles asked. "Some diplomatic observers have noted the increased prominence of the Princess of Wales and have inquired whether this reflects changes in succession planning or the relative status of different family members." The room fell quiet as everyone processed the implications of Lady Susan's observation. International relations often depended on subtle signals and careful interpretations of royal behavior. Any misunderstanding about the British royal family's internal dynamics could have far-reaching consequences. "That's exactly why transparency is important," Camilla said firmly. "If we're clear about what we're doing and why, there's less room for misinterpretation. But transparency requires us to be clear about what we're doing ourselves," William pointed out. "Which brings us back to some fundamental questions we haven't fully answered." Charles stood and moved to the large window overlooking the palace courtyard, where workers were installing decorations for the French president's arrival. The conversation had reached the heart of the matter that had been developing for months. "William's right," he said finally. "We've been responding to circumstances and opportunities, but we haven't articulated a clear philosophy about what we're trying to achieve." "I thought our philosophy was to maximize effectiveness," Catherine said. "That's a goal, not a philosophy," Charles replied. "The philosophy would explain how we define effectiveness and why we believe collaboration serves it better than traditional approaches." Camilla joined her husband by the window. "Perhaps our philosophy is that the monarchy serves the people best when it makes full use of the talents and abilities of all its members, rather than limiting individuals to narrow roles based solely on hierarchy or tradition." "That's elegant," Sir Clive observed. "And it provides a framework for explaining current changes while leaving room for future evolution." "It also suggests that what we're doing isn't unprecedented," William added. "Throughout history, the monarchy has adapted its practices to meet changing circumstances. We're continuing that tradition, not breaking from it." Catherine pulled out a notepad and began writing. "If we're going to present this philosophy publicly, we need to be able to articulate it clearly and consistently. Every family member should be able to explain our approach in the same terms." The next hour was spent refining their shared understanding of what they were doing and why. By the end of the session, they had developed language that could be used in speeches, interviews, and diplomatic briefings to explain their collaborative approach. "The monarchy has always been strengthened by the diverse talents of its members," Charles would later say in a speech that became a defining moment of his reign. "Today we're finding new ways to coordinate those talents in service of the causes and communities we're privileged to support." But before that speech would be delivered, they had to prove that their new approach could work under the intense scrutiny of a state visit. The French president's arrival was scheduled for Tuesday morning, and every element of the week-long program would be analyzed by diplomatic observers, media commentators, and royal watchers around the world. Monday evening found Catherine and Camilla in one of the palace's smaller reception rooms, reviewing their joint presentation for the National Gallery event. They had decided to deliver alternating sections of the same speech, a format that would demonstrate their collaboration while allowing each woman to speak to her areas of expertise. "Are you nervous?" Catherine asked as they finished their final rehearsal. "Terrified," Camilla replied with characteristic honesty, "but also excited. If we can make this work, it proves that everything we've been developing over the past month is sustainable under pressure. And if we can't, then we learn from our mistakes and try a different approach," Camilla said pragmatically. "But I don't think we're going to fail. We've put too much thought and preparation into this." Catherine nodded, feeling the same mixture of anticipation and confidence that had characterized all their recent collaborative efforts. Tomorrow would mark either the successful international debut of their new approach or a very public learning experience about its limitations. As they left the palace that evening, both women carried with them the weight of knowing that their partnership had grown from a practical solution to scheduling conflicts into something that could reshape the public role of the British monarchy for generations to come. The French president's state visit began with perfect weather and flawless ceremony. The arrival at Horse Guards Parade unfolded with the precision that centuries of royal protocol had perfected. But observant guests noticed subtle differences in how the royal family positioned themselves and interacted during the formal elements. Catherine stood beside Camilla during the inspection of the guard, and when photographers captured them sharing a quiet comment about the ceremony, their easy rapport was evident to everyone present. The French First Lady, watching from her position near the king, later remarked to her staff that she had never seen such natural collaboration between royal family members. The first real test of their new approach came at Tuesday evening's state banquet. These events traditionally followed a strict seating arrangement and speaking order that reflected royal hierarchy. This time, however, Charles had made a significant change to the program. Instead of separate speeches from different family members, he announced that the evening would feature a joint presentation by the Queen Consort and the Princess of Wales on the cultural and educational ties between Britain and France. The announcement created a ripple of interest throughout the diplomatic community, as joint speeches by royal family members were virtually unprecedented. Camilla began the presentation with remarks about the historical literary connections between the two countries, drawing on her extensive work with literacy programs to highlight how French and British writers had influenced each other across centuries. Her words were scholarly but accessible, delivered with the confidence that comes from genuine expertise. "Literature has always been a bridge between our nations," she said, creating understanding that transcends political boundaries and economic interests. When British children read French fairy tales and French students study English poetry, they're participating in a conversation that began centuries ago and continues today. Catherine followed seamlessly, transitioning from historical context to contemporary initiatives. Today, that conversation continues through educational exchanges, cultural partnerships, and collaborative programs that strengthen not just our government's relationships, but the connections between our peoples. The transition between speakers was so smooth that observers later commented it seemed like a single presentation delivered by two voices rather than separate speeches by different individuals. The French delegation was visibly impressed, and President Macron's response specifically praised the innovative format. "This evening has shown us a new model of diplomatic engagement," he said. "When nations can demonstrate internal collaboration and unity of purpose, it strengthens international partnerships as well." The success of the banquet speech created momentum that carried through the rest of the week. Each subsequent event became an opportunity to demonstrate different aspects of their collaborative approach, from joint visits to cultural institutions to coordinated meetings with French business leaders. Thursday's National Gallery event proved to be the highlight of the visit. Catherine and Camilla had spent hours preparing a presentation that would showcase British artistic heritage while highlighting contemporary cultural diplomacy initiatives. The gallery's main hall was filled with diplomatic guests, cultural leaders, and journalists from both countries. "Art speaks a universal language," Catherine began, standing beside a Turner landscape that had been specially lit for the occasion. but it also tells uniquely national stories that help us understand each other's perspectives and values. Camilla continued the thought seamlessly. The works we'll see today represent not just British artistic achievement, but Britain's ongoing conversation with the world. Many of these pieces were influenced by French techniques, French subjects, or French artistic movements. As they moved through the gallery together, their presentation became a flowing dialogue rather than formal speeches. When they paused before a portrait by Gainsborough, Catherine spoke about the artist's technique while Camilla discussed the historical context. At a display of contemporary British sculpture, Camilla highlighted the educational programs that had supported the artist's development while Catherine explained how similar initiatives were creating opportunities for young people today. The French delegation followed their progress through the gallery with obvious interest, and several diplomats were overheard commenting that they had never experienced such an engaging royal presentation. The format allowed for natural interaction with guests, as Catherine and Camilla could respond to questions and comments while maintaining the flow of their joint narrative. But it was a spontaneous moment that truly captured the success of their collaboration. When a young art student in the group asked about opportunities for British students to study in France, both women immediately turned to the French education minister, who was part of the delegation. Minister Dubois has been working on exactly that kind of program, Camilla said warmly. Would you be willing to discuss the scholarship opportunities your ministry has developed? Catherine added, naturally facilitating a conversation between the student and the official. The resulting exchange lasted 15 minutes and concluded with the minister inviting the student to apply for a new fellowship program. The moment was captured by photographers and later featured prominently in coverage of the visit. But more importantly, it demonstrated how their collaborative approach could create real opportunities for the people they were meant to serve. Friday morning brought the final formal event of the visit, a ceremony at Westminster Abbey celebrating British-French friendship. Charles had asked Catherine and Camilla to deliver the closing remarks together, a symbolic culmination of the week's collaborative approach. Standing at the Abbey's famous lectern, with centuries of British history surrounding them, the two women delivered what many observers later called one of the most effective royal speeches in recent memory. This week has reminded us that partnerships are strongest when they honor both tradition and innovation, Camilla said. When they build on established foundations, while remaining open to new possibilities, Catherine continued. The friendship between our nations has endured because it has been willing to evolve, they said together, their voices harmonizing in the Abbey's perfect acoustics. The French president's response to the ceremony was warmly personal. Your Majesties have shown us that collaboration is not just a diplomatic strategy, but a reflection of values that strengthen both families and nations. As the official elements of the visit concluded, Charles felt a deep sense of satisfaction about what had been accomplished. The week had proven that their new collaborative approach could enhance rather than complicate formal diplomacy. More importantly, it had demonstrated to international partners that the British royal family was united, purposeful, and committed to finding effective ways to serve their responsibilities. That evening, as the French delegation departed, Charles gathered his family for a private dinner at Windsor Castle. The informal setting provided an opportunity to reflect on the week's events without the pressure of official responsibilities. I think we may have started something that will outlast all of us, he said as they shared wine and conversation in one of the castle's private dining rooms. We've certainly proven that collaboration can be as dignified and effective as competition, Camilla replied. Maybe more so, Catherine added. When people see us working together genuinely, it reflects well on the institution as a whole. William, who had observed the week's events closely, offered his own assessment. The international response has been remarkable. Diplomatic observers are calling this one of the most successful state visits in recent memory. But Charles was thinking beyond diplomatic success. The week had demonstrated that the changes they had been implementing were not just beneficial for the royal family's internal dynamics, but for their ability to represent Britain effectively on the world stage. Their collaborative approach had become a reflection of contemporary British values, showing that tradition and innovation could work together to create something stronger than either could achieve alone. 6 months had passed since the French state visit, and the transformation within the royal family had become so natural that it was hard to remember how they had operated before. The collaborative approach that had begun as a response to scheduling conflicts had evolved into a new model of modern monarchy that was being studied and emulated by royal families across Europe. Charles sat in his study on a quiet Sunday morning, reading through the week's correspondence. Among the official letters and diplomatic cables was a handwritten note from his granddaughter Charlotte, thanking him for the family picnic at Balmoral, where she had watched her mother and step-grandmother work together to organize games for all the visiting children. Mummy and Granny Camilla make a good team, Charlotte had written in her careful 7-year-old handwriting. They know how to make everything fun. The innocent observation made Charles smile, but it also reflected something profound. The changes in royal protocol and public appearances had filtered down to create a more harmonious family dynamic at every level. The children saw collaboration as normal, natural, and effective. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts, and Catherine entered carrying a tea service and what appeared to be several newspapers. "Good morning," she said warmly, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I thought you might want to see this morning's coverage of yesterday's hospital opening." Charles accepted the tea gratefully and glanced at the headlines she had brought. The coverage was overwhelmingly positive, but more importantly, it focused on the substance of the event rather than analyzing royal family dynamics. After months of collaborative appearances, the media had stopped looking for signs of competition or tension and had begun covering royal events as they were intended, highlighting the causes and communities being served. The children's reaction to the new pediatric wing was wonderful, Catherine said, referencing the previous day's event where she and Camilla had jointly opened a new facility at Great Ormond Street Hospital. Camilla mentioned that the hospital administrators were particularly pleased with the educational library you suggested. Adding to the wing, Charles replied. That was actually her idea, Catherine corrected with a smile. She noticed that many families spend weeks at the hospital and thought reading programs might help both patients and siblings cope with extended stays. This kind of collaborative innovation had become typical of their joint appearances. Instead of simply fulfilling ceremonial duties, Catherine and Camilla had begun identifying ways to enhance the impact of their visits, combining their different perspectives and expertise to suggest improvements that neither might have thought of alone. Speaking of collaboration, Charles said, I've received a rather interesting invitation that I'd like to discuss with both of you. Oh? The Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting next year will include a special session on modernizing traditional institutions while preserving their essential values. They've asked the royal family to participate in a panel discussion about our experience with institutional evolution. Catherine set down her teacup, immediately understanding the significance of the invitation. They want us to share what we've learned about collaborative leadership. Exactly. It would be an opportunity to explain our approach to other institutions facing similar challenges about balancing tradition with adaptation. The conversation that followed outlined what would become one of the most important presentations of Charles's reign. The Commonwealth panel would allow them to articulate the philosophy they had developed through practice, sharing insights that could benefit organizations far beyond the monarchy. Later that day, Charles, Catherine, and Camilla met in the palace's oak room to begin planning their presentation. The space, with its warm wood paneling and comfortable seating, had become their preferred location for strategic conversations. We should start with honesty about why we needed to change, Camilla suggested. Traditional approaches were limiting our effectiveness, and we found ways to overcome those limitations. But we need to emphasize that change was built on respect for existing values rather than rejection of them, Catherine added. We didn't abandon protocol. We found ways to make protocol serve our purposes better. Charles took notes as they talked, struck by how naturally the two women had learned to build on each other's ideas. Their partnership had evolved from careful coordination to genuine intellectual collaboration, each woman's insight strengthening the other's contributions. The key message should be that institutional strength comes from flexibility, not rigidity, he said. Our monarchy is more effective today because we're willing to adapt our methods while maintaining our core mission. The conversation continued for 2 hours, covering everything from practical implementation strategies to the psychological challenges of changing established patterns. By the end of the session, they had outlined a presentation that would offer concrete guidance to other institutions while demonstrating the principles they advocated. This feels like a natural evolution of everything we've been building, Camilla observed as they prepared to conclude. It is, Charles agreed. We've proven that collaboration works for us. Now we have an opportunity to help others discover what might work for them. That evening, Charles found himself reflecting on the remarkable journey the royal family had taken over the past year. What had begun as a practical response to Catherine's growing popularity and effectiveness had become a fundamental reimagining of how the monarchy could operate in the modern world. The changes had strengthened every aspect of their public role. Their charitable work had become more impactful through coordinated efforts. Their diplomatic effectiveness had improved through collaborative presentations. Most importantly, their ability to connect with the British people had deepened as the public saw authentic cooperation rather than artificial competition between family members. But perhaps the most significant change was personal. Charles had watched his wife transition from someone who felt she needed to prove her worth to someone who was confident in her unique contributions. He had seen Catherine grow from a devoted royal family member to a genuine partner in shaping the institution's future. Most remarkably, he had witnessed the development of a friendship between the two women that was based on mutual respect and shared purpose, rather than mere familial obligation. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was William calling from Kensington Palace. "Father, I wanted to thank you," William said without preamble. "For what?" "For having the wisdom to recognize what was happening and the courage to embrace it, rather than resist it. Watching Catherine and Camilla work together has made me understand something important about leadership, which is that the strongest leaders are those who can enhance others' abilities, rather than feeling threatened by them. You created space for both women to excel, and the result has benefited everyone." Charles felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in his study's fireplace. "They created the partnership, William. I just tried not to interfere with something that was working." "That's leadership too," William replied, "knowing when to step back and let others succeed." After the call ended, Charles returned to his correspondence, but his mind remained focused on the transformation his family had undergone. The monarchy he would eventually pass to William would be stronger, more flexible and more connected to contemporary values than the one he had inherited. But more than that, it would be an institution that had learned how to harness the unique strengths of all its members in service of the greater good. The lesson, he realized, extended far beyond royal protocol. In any family, organization, or institution, the choice between competition and collaboration could determine whether individual talents were wasted in conflict or multiplied through cooperation. The royal family had chosen collaboration, and the results had exceeded everyone's expectations. As Charles prepared for bed that night, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought them to this point. Catherine's natural gifts had created the catalyst for change, Camilla's wisdom had guided the transition, and William's support had made everything possible. Together they had written a new chapter in the long story of the British monarchy, one that would influence royal families and institutions around the world for generations to come. The transformation was complete, but Charles knew it was also ongoing. The collaborative approach they had developed would continue to evolve, adapting to new challenges and opportunities while maintaining the core principle that had made it successful: that people achieve more together than they ever could apart.